Hello and welcome to the first episode of 2022 of our recycling podcast, Recycle, Don't Be a Waster. We hope all our listeners and everyone out there had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's and a well-deserved break after what was not the easiest of years in 2021. So here is to a wonderful new year in 2022. In today's episode, we are going to, do an introduction. We will not probably cover it in total depth that maybe it warrants, because I think we will come back to this topic in future episodes. But we've already covered or hinted at this topic in some previous episodes, and that is the concept of incineration and where incineration fits into a sensible environmental recycling proposal or situation or infrastructure for a city, a country, or even a business. I think it's pretty easy to understand why incineration has a bad reputation. I don't know if that's the right term, but it certainly isn't seen as modern or as high tech, as clean, as green, as recycling, as reuse, and of course that's logical. I think in human nature and in human society, anthropologists could probably go back and tell us, when fire was invented and burning things, so it goes back to the mists of time. But I think in this podcast we'll cover a little bit of the pros and cons and obviously the negatives, but I'll give you a plot warning here. I'm going to argue that there is a place for what we'll call modern incineration in any sensible approach. So I think the negatives of fundamentally burning waste are you're destroying potentially valuable materials, and B, you are emitting pollution, depending obviously on what you're burning and the way you burn it. But of course you will be emitting gases, greenhouse gases, poisonous, likely toxic fumes. I don't think you want to live right next door to an incineration plant. You don't want to be breathing in burning plastics or that sort of thing. So, that is pretty simply why it's seen as a negative. Obviously, with all the focus, increasingly so on global warming and the greenhouse gases and that sort of aspect, incineration has probably had an even more increased negative aspect. But, I suppose that's the negative, and that is, that sees it as all dark. On the other side, there are countries, and they are very advanced countries globally, who are very keen on incineration and fundamentally burn nearly everything they can get their hands on. And when I say that, I'm thinking of countries, specifically Sweden in Northern Europe and Japan. And I think very few people would argue that those two countries are backward or not focused on the environment or not focused on technology. And the question is, why do they do that? Sweden is very focused on incineration. They burn, I think, the vast majority of the waste they produce, even to the extent that they import waste from other countries. So they'll import waste from other Scandinavian and Northern European nations to burn it. And I suppose the question is, why would they do that? If we've covered the negatives, why would a country do that? And again, we go back into the mists of time. Why do people burn things? The first reason is to get rid of something. But the second reason is to produce heat. Back in olden times, it was to heat a house or a property, and now it is often to create, burn the product and create electricity. So Scandinavia and Sweden has, very much focused on electricity generation from incineration. So they're burning those materials, plastics, items such as that, which are, let's be honest, plastic is made from fossil fuels. It burns very easily. It releases lots of energy, and that energy, can be used to turn turbines, create electricity, and power industry, homes, whatever else. So, that's the reason why they do it. It's also incredibly cost effective. Let's be honest. cost effectiveness is, for any business or country, is very important. You can probably generate electricity cheaper than many other methods. It's a very reliable, waste stream, energy stream. If you look at the news in Northern Europe and in Europe, they, in recent years, have been going through energy crisis, one after another, due to, and almost, the European Union, you could argue, is becoming dependent on Russian and ex-Soviet nation gas. So there are geopolitical issues there too. With the investment in, renewable, classic renewable energy such as water and wind, the problem with those is that they are not as reliable. They can go up and down. Logic tells you have windy days and less windy days. And when you have that, it creates issues. So burning waste fundamentally is a very reliable energy source, equivalent to burning coal. So the modern plants they operate in Sweden are much better than the old plants, and they capture a lot of, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, we can cover this in a future podcast, but they capture a very, very large percentage of the more negative emissions. So, you can capture the carbon emissions coming out, you can capture poisonous fumes, those sort of things, so that you're getting the benefits, but without most of the negatives. I'll not, sugarcoat everything. I don't have the details, but I assume a certain percentage of noxious, negative emissions still are released. But I suppose that's the plus side. And Japan, another country famous for technology and innovation, they are also very keen on incineration for the same reasons. Another reason I would suggest that these countries are keen on burning items is because we've covered in many podcasts, certain plastics cannot be recycled. Once you go through the cycle of X number of times, whatever it is that you can recycle a product, after a while it's not recyclable or the facilities are not available. So, you're staring at landfill or incineration. And if I'm going to be honest, incineration to me is a much, much better option. In landfill, the product will decay over time, but we're talking thousands of years. It might pollute the ground, all these sort of things. Whereas, at least in a modern plant, it's a clean way of getting rid of the product, and it creates energy, which is clearly a benefit. The other aspect, and this is where it gets into a grey area, some people will lobby and argue that we should call incineration green energy, which to many environmentalists, you'd laugh out of town that suggestion. I suppose it's almost the opposite of what people view as clean and renewable energy. But if you think about it, the argument goes, and we'll cover the argument here, when you burn waste plastic that has no other use, in theory, you're reducing the need for new carbon emissions. And in theory, I think it's not up for debate, you are reducing the amount of carbon emissions in the environment. So if you have a piece of plastic, let's say 1 ton of plastic that exists, it's already waste, there's nothing you can do about it, and you have to get rid of it. Option one is you put it and you can't recycle it in this scenario because of the product, the material, it's reached the end of its useful life, whatever it is, it's not possible to recycle this product. So, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about materials that cannot be recycled in this instance. We're not talking about burning valuable, cardboard, timber, plastics that cannot be recycled. So, this is the end of life, least bad option. So either you dump it in landfill, it will gradually over a long period of time decay, release emissions, those emissions, greenhouse gases, etc., will pollute the atmosphere. And of course, in modern landfills that we've covered, you can capture that gas and you can burn turbines and you can, heat, create electricity. The issue there, I would say, is it's less efficient, certainly a dirtier method of doing it, and will not create as much electricity in a short period of time. Alternative two is you simply bring it to a modern incineration plant and it creates, reliable energy. Obviously then, by that creation of energy, you do not need to create that energy elsewhere. Let's say you have a certain amount of, and this is where I'll show myself up as a non-scientist, kilowatts or kilojoules or whatever the method of measurement of large amounts of megawatts, whatever it is, the large amounts of electricity generation. If you've got that from your incineration plant, you will not need to burn as much coal, gas, oil in theory, to create that energy. So the argument is that we're actually reducing the net amount in the atmosphere. By burning it, you're actually displacing or reducing that amount of the amount of new carbon emissions and emissions from burning fuel and coal. So to me, it is a good argument. It's that old saying, play the ball where it lies. We're not in a perfect world. We've already created the plastic. And I see incineration as most suitable for plastic. We've already created the plastic, which may not have been, in many instances, the best option. Did we really need to use single-use plastic? In many scenarios, no. But we have created it. It exists, and it looks like we're going to create it for quite a long time more. So as long as that is being created, we have to find a way to get rid of it, and to get rid of it in a way that A, does not damage the environment too much, the least bad option, and B, if this is when it cannot be recycled or reused, and B, that creates some economic gain to society, such as electricity, which clearly is a beneficial outcome. So it is, I personally believe that a joined up, sensible adult approach to recycling, to the environment, to waste management, inevitably will include some aspect of incineration. That old saying, what's out of sight is out of mind, I think is very pertinent in this discussion, because with landfills, you don't know where they are in many instances, and what you don't see, you don't think about, and it's in the ground, and who cares once it gets to that position? That's the view of many people. But and potentially incineration has more negative characteristics. I would argue that as a society, we probably should look at changing that mindset. Obviously, let's reduce the amount of single-use plastic. Let's increase recycling. Let's reuse as much as possible. So we reduce and reduce and reduce that volume, whatever tonnage of plastic waste that we cannot get rid of. But I would argue that potentially modern, clean, high-tech incineration plants should form part of the solution to that waste. So, look, I'll be interested in hearing people's feedback on this one. I think it may be slightly more controversial than others. I know a lot of our listeners are very keen on recycling. I am too. But I think, I'll not preempt what people will say, but I'll be interested in hearing people's views. So, I'll say Happy New Year to everyone. And, of course, recycle. Don't be a waster.